This might be a little bit of review, but I feel like I need just to go through all the artifacts so you guys know what it's doing. Unless you want me to go to a different topic, unless you guys are experts with frameworks at this point. Okay, so I guess I will. Frameworks, different diagrams, different models. I will open up the domain. So every folder and HSP NextGen, where we keep our code, is representative of a domain. Let's go to the payroll domain. And every domain has a models project. So let's find that. The models project has two folders, detail and general. And general has static diagram. Payroll happens to be quite a large project, so the static diagram therefore has a lot of boxes. The dark green box represents a client. That is a web application. That is not a service. The blue represents managers. The yellow represents engines. The gray represents access services. And I guess I will call it turquoise will represent the different databases. The purple represents utilities. A utility is cross-cutting through the domain. If I needed a new application, a new service, I might drag on a manager, and we'll call this test manager. And perhaps I need a new access service, so I'll drag one of those on. And let's call this test access. If I wanted to create solutions for these services, because they would not have a solution yet, we do not create them by hand, ever. We would select one or more boxes, and we would say create solutions. If at this point I were to maneuver to the payroll domain, so that would be under source and HSP NextGen payroll, I could see that there's my test access and test manager. Inside that has a solution file, and that's about it at this point. Let's quickly go into another type of model called the call chain. Call chains are a representation of how we maneuver through the services for a particular use case. In this example, we have a use case called get workbook for period. It starts at the web, talks to the period manager, talks to the period access, or talks to the workbook engine. The workbook engine talks to these guys. This is at a very, very high level. It doesn't show returns. It just shows flow. Typically, a call chain will satisfy one or more use cases. If we have 10 use cases and the same call chain represents them all, so be it, but that would be unusual. It would start to make me think, is this really accurate, or do I need more call chains? Okay. This project doesn't have any other type of model. There are a couple more, but that's all that this project has. So let's go back into our static model and let's save that. Now, we were in the models project. We're not often in the models project. We're normally working inside a service. The models project can stand alone in its own solution, however. So let's open up our test access that we just created. And at this point, when we go to the Solution Explorer, we can see that at the current time, we only have one project in the test access solution, and that's the models. Now, the models always has a detail folder and a general folder. And inside detail, we have access, engines, managers, and utilities. We never have this. This is a huge mistake from somebody. If I were to click on this, I could see that this actually makes my eyes hurt because it's not standard. I have boxes all over the place. I literally can't read this. I don't know what's what. And if I go into this, I bet you it's the same story. Let's see. Here's another one. I can't read it. I literally cannot read this thing. We have boxes all over the place. It's not standard at all. Let's go into something that I know is standard, which is probably any other model. There's my service configuration followed by my enums, my data request objects, etc. My configurations over here. I know exactly where everything is. Now think about this. You know how many models we have? We probably have a couple hundred models. If I have to learn how to read each one by itself, that is a total waste of time. Instead, if I know how to go into any given model and know exactly where every box should be or every type of box, then I can read it much more easily. Even this is a bit aggravating here. Payment enums go in this column. We're very, very careful about our models. We treat it as code. Our models are they are more important than code. They do not compile like code, but they're much more important because they tell a bigger story about the service, and they must be, the way they are designed must be standard. I need to be able to go out to this level and determine what this service does. I should not have to read. Reading is a skill that our brains do very, very poorly with. Our brains are one big video processor. Reading is a high-level skill that takes a long time to learn and a long time to master and a long time to execute. Our brains just can see things very quickly, and I call this shape. So if the models aren't in good shape, then I have to read it, and that takes a lot longer. If my code is not in good shape, then I have to read it, and that takes a lot longer. I'll talk a lot more about shape as we go on. Okay. Let me close this. I am in the test access service that we just used as an example. Frameworks created the solution on my demand, but we notice that there's no other projects. What I want to do is, at this point, I want to create the model. So we will add a new item, and we will find frameworks, and we will add a model named after the service, which is test access. And we will just fix it up a bit. And we'll call this test access. Put this over here for now. We will fix it. Always goes in the same place. And let's add an operation. Whoops. Let's just say that this is get payroll period. And let's say that the get payroll period. That's unfortunate. It doesn't look like my toolbox is working. I've seen this before. That kind of blows my whole demonstration, actually. Let's think about why this happens for a second. Toolbox not there. Okay, so the toolbox not being there, I probably have to uninstall and reinstall frameworks. I think that's a defect in Visual Studio itself. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to a existing service again. I think I can demonstrate the same thing. What I was going to do is I was going to show you that after I get done with the preliminary parts of my model, I can set the custom tool to Frameworks 2013 custom tool, and that will link up the Frameworks code generator with this model. There's just one other thing I have to do here, and I'm going to say that the domain token is HSP, and the model type is an access model, and the project's template, C: engineering source templates. I'll explain that, and I will turn on generating code. Generate code true. When I do this, let's just close up the models project here. The next time I hit save, Frameworks will say code generation was refused. Projects that would be used to store the code either does not exist or is not recognized by this model. If you choose to continue, code will be generated. Projects may be created and added to the solution, or in the case that projects already exist, an entry will be placed in the properties frameworks XML file, etc. So when we click continue, Frameworks will create all the projects of the solution and will place the necessary folders and generate the necessary code. Notice once again that there are my 4 projects in this solution. It's very consistent. You can go into every service that we have and see the same projects. You can go into every service that we have and see the same folders. You can go into every service that we have and expect to see exactly what you see in every other service. That means you basically have to learn the structure one time, and you know the structure for 300 solutions. Let me go back into a different solution. so I can start talking about artifacts. Well, before I do that, this is an access service. Oh, my commands didn't come in. Okay. This is an access service, so let me go into another access service, the payroll period access. I think we were in this the other day. Sure, save it. And once again, I'm in a different service, but it looks exactly the same. Client contracts service tests. So what I want to go through right now is I want to show you how any given model item is represented in code. This is the service. The service is represented in the generated folder, in the implementation folder. It has a payroll period access piece of generated code, of which we spoke of the other day. This is the code that WCF will instantiate when the WCF dispatcher decides to send a request onto the service. Okay. The service configuration manifests itself in a different way, not through C# code, but through XML style configuration. So this is an access service. An access service needs information about the database configuration. We can see that all this is tokenized. Payroll token database name appender, server, etc. In our code base, we have a configuration file called the base configuration, and we also have token files. Each one of you has a token file, at least one, and so does each server has their own token file. In the token file, you will see tokens for every token placeholder here. And that's the way that we configure our services during initialization. And that's why we do not need web config, which I am a big believer that you never should use web config in all but the most extreme situations, because it's a maintenance nightmare. Okay, that's configuration for an access service. That's the entity configuration, and there will be one entity configuration for every entity configuration box we have. And there's always one entity configuration per database. So in this access service, if we go down a bit, and I know it's down here because it's standard, we can see that we have entities for payroll and entities under the HR and entities under metadata. So I would expect that we have one configuration for every one of those. So this is for payroll, and this one is for HR, and this one is for metadata. And therefore, I have these configurations: entity config HR and metadata. I also have one other configuration, and that's the configuration for my service itself. This may or may not look a little bit like WCF configuration that you have seen in the past. We have a service endpoint collection with a service endpoint list and service endpoints within that list. There are 3 endpoints in this configuration because there are 3 endpoints that's set up by default. For every endpoint that it's created, that is created, there would be one more entry into the payroll period access config. So let's look at one of these entries. Service endpoint. This is a WCF endpoint. Receive timeout, send timeout, etc. You will see all kinds of WCF information, address, what have you. That's all there is for WCF configuration. Again, we do not use web config. The different standard configurations will have, of course, different endpoint capabilities. And I'll tell you about why we have different endpoints at a later point in time. Another type of configuration that is emitted is configuration regarding security. We talked about our WS-Fed and WS-Trust security claims enabled security using WIF. WIF has a number of configuration knobs. A couple of them are the relying party. And within relying party, we have a trusted issuer, which basically means who am I going to trust for that would create my security token. So I trust a source that has this STS certificate thumbprint and this name. If any other token is presented to me that does not have that certificate thumbprint and name, WIF will reject it out of hand. So relying party means that this application relies on the STS. Okay, good. That's a bit about configuration. Enums. So enums are used for your traditional reasons in C# during coding, and you can certainly create an enum here. They're also used for validation. If the get payroll period operation has a get payroll period request, we can choose an attribute, a property of that request, and let me pin this, and we could go down to the validation section, and we can determine if there's any validations for the payroll period ID, of which there is none. Let's see if we can find one. So these validations are not being used. That's interesting. Here's a validation. Here is a property that is using a validation. And we're saying that the alternate key cannot be empty enum there is used if this alternate key GUID is not a valid GUID. So if it's null, if there's zeros or whatever there is, if it's not a valid GUID, then we will throw a validation without the benefit of the developer having to write code. And you will see this typically a lot. If somebody passes, get dog and the ID is 0, then we can set a validation to be a minimum of 1. And if that's the case, here's a minimum acceptable value. And if it goes below that value, then we will throw a validation, and that validation will be hooked up to an enum. And the reason why it's hooked up to an enum is so that we can easily test, and the consumer of this application can easily say, oh, that's a validation for this. There's no strings involved. And that way we can use the compiler to help us out. There's validations for all kinds of different capabilities. We can validate against an entity, which means we can hook this get payroll period up to the payroll period entity, and we can query for the payroll period entity. And if the payroll period isn't there, then we can throw a validation. So if they ask for payroll period 21 and 21 is not there, then it will be validated out, and the developer won't have to write any code whatsoever, which is a really, really useful and big time saver. Okay. Enums are put into the data configuration folder. So I can look for get payroll period enum, and there's my code generated payroll period enum. Great. Data contracts. Typically, I think I've said this many times, if you have get payroll period, you probably have a request. And if it's a two-way synchronous call, then you probably have a response. Both the request and the response you will find in the data contract. So there's our request, and the data members all there, and the data contract, and there's our response. In this case, the response has a payroll period list attached to it, which is an iCollection of payroll period. Okay, great. The purple boxes are simply a modeling tool to keep our lines straight. If you look at this, we don't have any crossing lines, or we shouldn't ever. Crossing lines are harder to look at. You have to actually follow them. There are no crossing lines. The purple box represents some other data contract that's found in the model someplace, and that's called an alias. And that's important to keep the models nice and clean, because what would happen if the payroll period was used here and here and down here and here? You'd have lines crossing all over the place. You can have many aliases that represents one data contract. And in that fashion, it's much easier to read. Great. Moving on. Every service needs an interface, and the interfaces are also put into the contracts, because the interface is a contract. And when I say the interface, I mean the service interface. So you will see for every operation, there's our get payroll period, it returns a response, and there's our request. Now, I said that before, that code-generated code is different than handwritten, and that it's not as pretty. It may not be compliant to all of ReSharper's rules that we have set up, but that's okay. It's code-generated. Typically, you rarely, if ever, would go into a code-generated file. Okay. It creates a client application, a client project, and the client might look something like this. This is the client for payroll period access, and the client has a method for every operation. We can see that method here, get payroll period, and that simply calls channel.getPayrollPeriod. So that's your client. It also has a different type of client called the in-proc client. Now, I don't think I'll go through in-proc right now very extensively, but if you know WCF well, then you will know that WCF can be hosted, a WCF service can be hosted in just about any place you could imagine. It can be hosted in IIS, it can be hosted in a console application, it can be hosted in a Windows service. It can be also hosted by another service. So if I have a payroll period manager service, and that payroll period manager service needs to talk to the payroll period access, I will typically have the payroll period manager host the access service. Why would I want to do that? Well, the access service doesn't need to be called by any consumer outside of the manager, or potentially an engine, and calls in proc, so to speak, would be faster than calls with WCF in other circumstances. So consider this. If I make a WCF request, if I call an operation on a service, that might go out to a load balancer and it might go to another machine. If it's in proc, it will always stay within that process. That's good because I can use net pipe binding, which is orders of magnitude faster than HTTP or NetTCP. So there really is no reason to go outside of that process. So a manager might host every single engine in Access that it might call. And that gives us great performance capabilities while keeping the sanctity of a service. So even though that's hosted in proc, it doesn't have to be. In fact, it can be hosted in proc and can be hosted on its own host. And sometimes that happens during testing. So that would be,
I have
yes,
a question actually.
yes,
Yeah, well, that means this manager is an entity which can actually host other services like engine or access services in pro. That means the as DLLs, right? So
yes,
those will be accessible only to the manager
that's correct. Or an engine.
or an engine.
Yes,
Okay.
yep.
Okay.
You might,
But why, means like, okay, means the question was actually, then why do we need services as such, you know? Because like if it is in proc and it's so we can have entities as well, right? Or some structures.
so, okay, that's actually there are a lot of ways I could go with that question. It actually touches on the subject of service-oriented architecture, which is a very large discussion in itself. But let's say that I want to call the access service from different managers. Okay, now what do? I create a library instead and include that library in the different managers. Okay, I guess I can. How does QA test that library? Can't be hosted someplace. If I create it as a service, it can be hosted someplace onto itself. Okay, there's one consideration. If I created libraries, I wouldn't be a SOA shop. Now, I don't think we want to necessarily talk about the virtues of SOA at this point because we'll be here all day. But needless to say, we are a SOA shop through and through. In fact, we are a micro SOA shop. So microservices is what we call it. And any piece of code that we write, not any piece of code, but a piece of code that has a very well defined boundary, which is one of the tenets of SOA, one of the tenets of services, that is a service. Now, this wasn't done years ago. And the reason why it wasn't done years ago and we were one of the first, actually, one of the first real adopters of SOA was because of frameworks. Because with frameworks, a service is nothing more than just some code placed in a project someplace. Everything else you get is for free. So where others were struggling to keep the sanctity of SOA, it didn't matter to us. In fact, Hemant, if I were to create a piece of code that was a library and not a service, oddly enough, I would create it with frameworks. Why? Why would I want to hand create a project? Why wouldn't I want a model, that shows the different aspects of that particular piece of code? And in fact, since you asked, I will go back to my contracts and I will show you something. iPayroll Period Access Direct. This is an interface that implements iPayroll Period Access. And Direct allows this service to be called as a library without going through the WCF protocols. So in fact, Hemant, this is a library as well. This is a WCF service. This is a service that can be used with Service Bus. All of the plumbing around this is already handled. The only thing we have to do is write our operation. So how we put these building blocks together is a matter of, in the end, a hosting model. That's what it really is. WCF, when it boils down to it, WCF promotes a hosting model to us. And that's about all it does. Now, I would probably be killed in a lot of circles for saying that, because WCF also promotes fault tolerance and transactional support. No, Mas, no. So the answer to your question is, yeah, sure. We can use this as a library without any penalty at all. But then I lose some of the nice things about SOA if I do that. Namely,
Sure.
significant boundaries around my code. I did write an email yesterday, and I spoke of, we will probably see a reduction of reliance on WCF. Not just us, but the world, I think. WCF's been around for quite a while, and I think it's served the world quite well. It comes with a lot of complexities. I think that's hard to deny, I mean, if for anybody, I don't know anybody that really knows WCF really well that hasn't studied and studied and studied it. I can't tell you how many hours I have and several different books just to wrap my head around what WCF really is. It's quite huge. And I think it served us well, but I think that going off in the future in 5 and 6 years, there'll be less of reliance on WCF, and we will see things like the Azure Service Fabric pop up. And when that happens, we will be easy adopters of it, because we just have to change our code generator and then just regenerate the code, and we're inside of the Azure Service Fabric in days. So that wasn't a direct answer to your question, but I hope you understood a little bit anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting as well as impressive. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sure.
Hello, John.
Yes.
Yeah, actually here all the solutions are WCF library applications, right? Why actually we created WCF library instead of WCF application? Means I feel it's very difficult to test library application instead of
Th-
WCF applications.
these are neither. These are just class libraries. They're nothing
Yeah.
more than class libraries. It's not a WCF application. It's just a class library, just like any other class library you would write. That's the solution type.
Mm, okay.
So in other words, this access service,
Hmm.
this access service, all of these projects, client,
Hmm.
contracts, and service, they're
Hmm.
simply class libraries. That's all. The host files, they're WCF applications. The host files are. But
Uh,
hosting is a should be a different design criteria than anything else. I can write my code, I can architect my code in any way I want, and then choose how to host it. I can host it in a WCF application. I could host it in proc. I could host it using IIS. I could host it in a Windows service. I could host it in a test console, in a console application. So hosting is another subject, but these are all class libraries.
okay. Okay, sir. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Don't ever call me Sir, Lakshmi. I'm
Oh, no, I
kidding.
didn't call sir. I said okay.
Okay. I think you said okay,
Okay.
but that would make me feel too old. I don't,
No, I didn't say sir. I didn't say sir.
okay. I don't want to feel old, Lakshmi. I want to feel young. Okay.
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 Okay, fine.
So, all right. At the end of the day, Hemant, I am a very, very big believer in the SOA model. And I think I will be for quite a number of years to come. And most everything we do is inside a service. That's not to say that there hasn't been extraordinary circumstances where I have called this piece of code, if you will, directly, because we do that. Because at the end of the day, calling it directly would bypass serialization, and serialization is probably one of the biggest um, one of the biggest hits we take when we call a service operation would be serialization. So, okay. And that's why I created the direct interface too. Another reason I created the direct interface is potentially I might want to use that in a unit test without going through WCF. Because if you think about a unit test, if I want to unit test an operation, then if I go through WCF, is that really still a unit test? It isn't. Why? Because WCF will take that request and serialize it. And it will go through the WCF channels, of which there can be 16 on one side and 16 on the other. So it really is no longer a unit test. It's really an integration test at that point. So the Access Direct interface would help me. Um, would help me do that. And there are situations, let me think of one.
Definitely.
Let me think of one here. I will actually, let's continue with this for 1 second. Let me show you another service. It is a utility service that I'm about to show you. And it's called many, many times in a short period of time. Let me go to engineering, source, HSP Next Gen, Shy Utility. Let's go to Field Utility. So this, first of all, whenever you see anything that's long, you should start thinking. This is This is very odd. It should only be probably this many operations. That would be, I would not allow that for a regular service. But this service is utilized through the direct interface that I was talking about. Why? Because we might need to call multiple so-called operations per millisecond. And I'm not going to get that if I'm going through WCF and serializing it. So we invoke a pattern called a facade. And the facade, let me see, field utility facade. It's another unusual example of a static class. But a consumer of this so-called, and I put my finger quotes up here, service can call this facade field utility dot maintain transaction, for example, and that this facade will call a class, which will then instantiate the direct interface, and then call the service, call the operation in that regard. Now, what are the benefits here? Well, we get extreme speed. We still keep to the same pattern of frameworks so that we can see the entire model, and all of our code base is the same. There's no specialization of different ways to do things. And what's really nice is that we can host this service so that, notice how there's just an improc and a QA drop, so that QA can test this service utilizing their SOAP testing tools. Now, if it wasn't a service, they wouldn't be able to do that. They wouldn't be able to test get row. See, in the when the factory, so to speak, when our department is working correctly, we create a service, and then QA will white box, not black box, but white box that service. At least white box to the point of every operation in that service. So QA gets to test get row. Otherwise, they would never have that ability to test that piece.
Right.
So there's an example where frameworks, it doesn't matter. You just worry about creating your service, and then just by flipping a switch, depends on how you consume it. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, definitely. It's the first time where I'm seeing that service being used in process, and it's really impressive. You get all the benefits of in proc.
Right.
That's really beautiful. Thank you.
Sure. By now, everybody knows my dog's name, right? Brody. And everybody knows my metaphor of Mona Lisa. If I put the Mona Lisa in front of Brody, he would eat it. Why? Because he wouldn't understand the beauty. Why do I bring this up now? Because Hemant just understood one of the beauties. Aha!
You pronounce it properly, but you write it incorrectly. It's H-E-M-A-N-T.
I know. I was kidding around, but yes, you had a little aha moment. Ah,
Sure. Yeah,
it's really
definitely.
it's really a nice thing.
Yeah.
Often, my son Andy Cacavaro is currently in college or university here at a university called University of Massachusetts, and he's a computer science major, and he's also a part-time developer for Radius. And I've been training him for a while. I mean, since he was in high school. And in high school, I showed him Dad's life's work, frameworks and Yeah, okay, Dad. So what? Well, he was Brody, right? He saw the Mona Lisa, but he didn't. He never experienced the pain. So what did he do when he saw frameworks? Metaphorically, he ate it, just like Brody would eat the Mona Lisa. But then he started going to computer science school and he started learning and he started experiencing some pain. And he comes back to me and he says, "Wow, Dad, that's pretty good." You know?
Yeah,
And I said, "Son,
yeah,
if you only knew, you know, if you only knew, it's like this. I mean, I'm I've been around in this business for a long time, and I've been through so many iterations of technology. And I started way back when I started on COBOL and punch cards. I mean, I don't even know if guys know what punch cards is. Lakshmi, do you know what a punch card is?
No, John, I don't have any idea about that.
You're kidding me. So that's unbelievable to me. So we didn't have monitors,
But
Lakshmi. There were no monitors. Monitors didn't exist. There were no keyboards to monitors. So what we had to
yeah,
do, we had to take a card, right?
okay.
A card, like, let me see if I can find one. I know I'm digressing here, but it's too interesting not to take the opportunity. Punch card. Let's see if I can find it under the word computer punch card. Here it is.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So the holes on this card
Hmm.
represented an ASCII character, and there's 80 columns here. So a hole might have represented one column might be represented some bit, some byte, and
Uh-huh.
we could string the bytes together and get 80 characters, and that 80 characters could be a computer statement. You know, integer x equals 5.
Uh-huh.
There were no displays. So we had to type out, and then when we typed it out, it would come out in this punch card, and then we would have a stack, thousands and thousands of punch cards, and when we feed it into a punch card reader, that would be our program, and that's what we could do. That's how I started programming. Think
Uh,
of that. I mean, it's
okay.
it's hard to even explain to you the pain. I had a final exam one time, and
Hmm.
dropped I dropped my punch cards like 2 weeks before the project was due. Can you imagine it? I dropped like 10,000 punch cards. I didn't have a program anymore because there was no order to the punch cards. I mean, I,
Mm.
I, I hope you can start to just picture just the brutalness of that. Like, this guy has like 50 punch cards attached to him. Here it is. This is how I started. This is it. This was like a punch card reader and sorter, and we had all these weird things. This was computers back in my day.
Okay.
You didn't experience this pain. Look at her. She's like turning some weird dial here. You don't see a display screen any place.
Yeah, yeah, right.
This was me. Okay? So can
Okay.
you can you imagine how I felt when I saw my first display? I mean, I freaked out. It was like, "Oh my goodness. This is unbelievable. I can type a character, it can go on a screen. That's unbelievable." I freaked out, right?
Yeah.
And like, so you have never experienced this pain.
Yes, John, you are right.
Right? So,
Yeah.
and the people before me, well,
Hmm.
they didn't have ASCII characters. They had ones and zeros. Think about that now. The way you code was not A, B, C, D, E, but it was ones and zeros.
Hmm.
And then, and then there's a joke, and then this really old guy came along and he said, "Wait a minute." He says to the other little bit less old guy, he said, "Hold on, you had ones? You get it? You had one." So the original guy just had zeros, which of course is, is crap. But it just goes to show, throughout evolution of technology, which has only been about 50 years. Okay. Um,
Yeah.
just we
Yeah.
experience so much pain. And I
And
promise you, this lady here,
uh,
she,
Mm-mm.
she didn't think that it was painful, right? She just thought this was it. This was great. I didn't have to go to my calculator. I could perform thousands of calculations. Heck, it's one of the reasons why the U.S. won the wars they did, is because we were ahead in computers, and instead of putting all the ballistic missile information, the bomb information of how far the bomb could fly, etc., into a calculator, or not a
mm,
calculator, what am I saying? Calculating it through mathematics by hand, we invented a calculator. We actually physically won the war because of that. So
yeah.
it's interesting. Pain allows us to create and find ways around pain. And I swear it, for 35 years, guys, I really mean this. I have been experiencing pain, and I have been finding ways around pain. In my
Yeah.
opinion, WCF was so painful, and web config was so painful that I had to find a way around web config, you know, and my way. And the thing is, just like that
Mm,
lady doesn't even know she's in pain. That lady doesn't know she's in pain. That's all she knows. Well, people in web config, using web config, they don't know it's painful. That's just what they do. It's what they do. They do web config. And it's like, what? And they say, well, what do you do then? Well, simply, I do not do web config. You know, what do you do? I do nothing. I literally do nothing. It's like, what do you mean I do nothing? I do nothing. That's what I do. And
yeah.
and it's because of pain is why
Yep.
frameworks is what it is today. It's 35 years of pain. It didn't take me 35 years to create, but the concepts took me 35 years of experiencing pain. And as I continue
Yeah.
to experience pain, I will continue to find ways around that pain. And I guess maybe what one of my capabilities is to recognize pain when I see it. I'm pretty good at that. I'm pretty good at recognizing pain. Where other people might like the pain, I don't like the pain. And I am such a believer in the human being should only be creating code that the human beings currently have to create. I don't want you creating code that you don't have to create. And web config to me doesn't add any value. XML configuration, these things don't add value. And that's where I want to step in and say, hold it, Mr. Human Being, I only want you doing things that add value. And as a benefit of this, we can use our big video processors in our brain to see models very quickly. And because of that, we can see what this thing is supposed to do very quickly. And it also gives us consistency so that Lakshmi's code looks like my code and Lakshmi's solution looks like my solution because because frameworks creates the solution and the models are consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're starting to see that?
Yeah. Yes, John.
So, okay,
Yeah.
good. Great question, Hamad. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you.
so I just let me wait. I've been talking already for an hour. Let me take another 10 or 15 minutes and then we'll end it. I want to go through I'll go through some of the artifacts more quickly here. So we have the generated clients and proxies, and um, when we generate the solutions, all of the correct references to all the correct projects will be there. When we create the contracts, we have configuration and data contracts and implementations created. When we create the service, that is where by far we have most of the items created. We have DAOs I spoke of the other day. A DAO is a data access object, and that's responsible for speaking directly to the database, and it does things like save and delete and query. You will also write custom or extend or write partial classes rather for custom DAOs where needed, because you'll need to write a complex query, for example, and for that you need a custom DAO. We have entities, and entities are POCOs, plain old CLR objects that doesn't have anything more than properties in it, and that roughly represents a table or a portion of a table, and it's what the ORM instantiates for you. We have entity validators. So an entity validator will validate some attributes before it ever goes to the database. For example, if the database has a first name, if the employee has a first name and the length is 255, if something gets passed into a save routine that's greater than 255, this frameworks is going to create this code that says, hold on, the database is 255. So you're passing me something that's 300 characters long, and it can't. You'll be exceeding the maximum number of characters. Now, if we didn't have this here, the SQL would give us some very, very cryptic and a message that wouldn't be easily consumable, and we would find it late. Here we find it early. And there's literally no penalty because we don't write this code. The first name can't be null, and you try to save it. Sorry, first name can't be null. And that's just all generated for you. Implementation we spoke of. Maps. Maps are a very big deal. We never, ever, ever, let me underscore that, ever let an entity outside the confines of a service. It exposes far too much information. It must go through a data contract in order for it to get outside. And in order for a entity to make its way through to a data contract, it needs to be morphed into a data contract. And the map is responsible for taking data contracts from a request object, turning them into a entity and back. So here we have at some point data contract.caption equals entity.caption. Well, that's a map. It takes an entity, it instantiates the data contract, and it assigns it. Okay. Operations. The developer writes an operation, but frameworks will create the interface to the operation and do some preliminary things to the operation to make it easier for you to hand code your operation. ORM you saw the other day, and that's the HBM code for nHibernate. Table type caches I'll talk about in a later day, and then we get into validators, and validators will, this is the piece of code that validates what I showed you earlier with request and enums. So in the get friendly status list request, the developer, let's see if we can really find it very quickly, get friendly status list. So we can see here that developer has specified that we want to validate the payroll period ID against the payroll period entity, and that the minimum acceptable value is 1. Well, that gets code generated into this validator class that validates the min payroll period ID. So if we go look at that, we can see that it will say validate min payroll period ID here. Payroll period ID does not exist, etc., etc. So that's what a validator is. So those are some of the artifacts. Let's see. It will also create stubs for you, and a stub will set up the operation and with the declarations. So all the developer has to do is actually go in. It actually even does this, sets this request and response. That's standard for us. So you just have to go in and fill in the rest. Take a look at this operation, by the way. There's not a method here that's anything more than, what, 8 or 7 lines of code? Look at the if statements. The only thing we ever use if statements for is to return early. If response validation results is valid, then return. Take a look at this. This is nothing more than a table of contents. You will see this as the public part of every operation, the table of contents. This is replacement for comments. What does this thing do? It assigns a payroll period, it assigns the calendar event schedule, and assigns the friendly status request. Notice how there is no if statements. There's no branching in the table of contents. Why? I want to be able to read that easily. Bang, bang, bang. It does these 3 things. Awesome. Done. Let me go home. In each operation, we'll say, okay, in each method, we'll say if the validation results is not valid, then return, then return, then return. And in that fashion, it keeps any branching out of this table of contents. Further, look what your eye starts to do. It doesn't even pay attention. Doesn't pay attention. The first statement is always the same. You don't even pay attention. So you literally have no impedance in order for you to read this operation. It's extremely simple. The very, very sad thing about this world is that people make coding complicated. It is my life's work to uncomplicate that. People are too smart for their own good. They write complicated codes like, no, why? And then you say, John, surely some of your code must be more complicated than this. Well, actually, guys, it's really not. I know it sounds hard to believe, but it's really not. The magic here is to understand the pattern of table of contents and understand the pattern, just how to make your methods simple. I can look at this and I can say, I don't have to read it. If I code review your stuff, I don't have to read it. I can look at the shape. I can see the shape will tell me, okay, is there methods that are very long? No, that's good. Or is there cyclomatic complexity, meaning that is there a lot of branching? No, that's good. How big is the class? It's small. That's good. What does my table of contents look like? Oh, that's good. All right, do I really need to diagnose a particular method? Let me take a look. Oh, geez, that's not very hard to understand, is it? What is this guy trying to do? Assign friendly status. Great. He calls a repository to get friendly status. He assigns it. He sets the validation results, and I'm done. That wasn't very hard. Got it. Done. Easy. Simple. Good night. It's that simple, guys. If you get nothing from me, get this. Coding is as simple as you could possibly imagine. It's the creativity of our brains that gives us the capability to write simple code. That's where the magic is, not in the actual code itself. We're not typists. Typists, we do a lot more than type. My daughter said, Dad, I don't want to do computer science because I don't want to sit in a cube all day and type. Well, geez, that's not what I do. I don't sit and type all day. I use my brain to create, and typing is just the final result. The code is simple. All right. Lakshmi, how you doing with that?
Yeah, John.
You're still
Actually, you are great. Yeah, John. Hello.
Yes, hi, Lakshmi.
Yeah. Here you are creating everything for us. We just need to work on operations then.
But do you see? I know it sounds more like a sermon than a training session, but is the point coming across? Do you see the simplicity of the code?
Yeah, right. Actually, it looks good and clear, and everything is organized manner.
To me, what I see is just pure, unadulterated beauty. That's what I see.
Yep.
I see beauty. I
Yes, yes,
see
John. Yeah.
I see the Mona Lisa.
Yeah, you are right. I can also see the Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's I'll stop it there. Next time we'll get into testing, and
Huh. Yeah.
I'll show you how we test and how simple it is to test when things are designed correctly, and how we execute integration tests and
Hmm.
how we might execute system tests. Just to give you just to give you a thought for the next time,
Hmm.
you guys saw
Hmm. Hmm.
payroll, right? And you saw how payroll has many different steps in it. You know, first you do this and then you do that and then somebody funds it and approves it and it goes from step to step. Well, think about the time you get to the last step, which is funding. Think about all the data that you would have and all the steps that you would have had to go through to get to the point where you can finally test that funding step. Oh my goodness, hours and hours and hours of it. And in fact, what what you see as a user is much more complicated to the system. So these are the different steps, the different internal steps to payroll. It has to go through all of these individual atomic steps to finally get to the point where it goes to history. In order to test, say, this step, number 60, I have to get from 1 through 59. I have to set up my database every time to run a few lines of code. Think about what that would be to do by hand. Oh my goodness, right? Well, because we have it broken down, at any step, I can create a set of databases that will exactly put my data set at that point where I can execute step number 40. I know you don't see the beauty yet. You don't see the Mona Lisa, but you will. And it's as pretty as you could possibly see. Your what your eyes will be exposed to will be just beauty at its best. Anyway, that's a good note to end on. I hope this was the right pace, and I hope we learned something,
Yeah.
and we'll pick it up again tomorrow.
Okay,
Sure,
John.
sure.
Any
Yep.
question? No,
Looking forward
sorry.
to that.
Questions. Give me questions if you want first before I hang up.
Uh,
Anything?
yeah, no, no questions, John. Actually, we just need to know how we are going to test this access service now.
Yep.
So let's continue the session tomorrow.
Okay. Anybody else?
Thank.
Uh, yeah, just one question from myself. If John, if you could open the model solution.
Sure. The model solution is. How about if I open up the model project? The model solution is just has the
Yeah.
model. I can do that if you want me to. You want me to open up the solution itself?
No, no. What I'm
Okay.
asking is like this. This is actually not the actual models. Um, this is a models project under this solution, right?
This is the same
And
project.
whereas you already have one different. Okay.
Yeah, this is the same project
Okay.
included in the solution. No different. Same exact project. If I were to make a change
Okay.
here, it would be picked up in the model solution. Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I think this week, I hopefully. So I don't know if anybody has worked with an enterprise service bus before, or an ES
Mm,
or an ESB, right? Or even know what one is.
Um,
no, John. Actually, I haven't worked on
Okay.
service bus.
No, this is an
same here.
enterprise, an
No enterprise service.
an enterprise service
Yes.
bus. It's different than the service bus. But I have built an enterprise service bus uh, for us, and it controls our workflow in our asynchronous
Okay.
programming endeavors, and it is something that workflow is a huge part of what we do. So hopefully by towards the end of the week, we build all the way up to the enterprise service bus, and that will give that will be a pretty good tutorial of just a vertical slice through our platform. Okay, I think I'll
Okay,
end
John.
it there.
Sure.
Lakshmi,
Yeah.
are you glad you came to work for us, Lakshmi?
Yeah.
You are?
Yeah.
Would you tell me that? Would you tell me if you weren't? If you didn't? Would you tell me?
Yes, John.
You would?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very impressive.
Yeah.
Come
Yeah.
on. See, there is no way.
Yes.
This is something to think about while recruiting.
Yeah.
There is
Yeah.
no way. I wish I could get through to somebody what we
Sure.
do.
No,
And
this is really wonderful. Like I am just, amazed to see the use of WCF, the way it has been used. All the plumbing is outside, and everybody has to focus on it. But the plumbing code, which was automated, has been automated in such a beautiful manner. You use it just the way you have to use it. You know,
right,
it's
right.
like wherever is required, in proc, wherever required, you host it.
Yep.
It's really very flexible, very impressive.
And
Thank you so much.
the benefits of this
And
too is I
and
get
even
to
the session was, yeah,
the benefit is I get to see it in a model too. That's just not the code
yeah,
generators. I can see it in the model. Now I want to be able to get this through to somebody, to a recruit, because I can sit there and say, look, I'm the best thing since sliced toast. But unless you've experienced the pain that I have, I can't show you in 30 seconds. One of my emails was sometime in 30 seconds to 6 months, you will see the beauty. And I think it's the amount of pain that have had in your life that allows you to see the beauty in either a quick amount of time or a long period of time. When recruiting people, it's hard for me to sit there and say, look, I'm going to show you stuff and I'm going to teach, and I'm still going to say it to you guys. I'm going to teach you stuff in the next 1 month and 1 year that you can't even possibly imagine exists yet. And you can't even imagine the way you're doing things right now. And that's why Mark
yeah,
Twain was so important to me. It's not what you think you know it's not what you don't know that will kill you, it's what you think you know to be wrong that will. And there are so
yeah,
many things that I'm going to show you over the course of the next year that will absolutely blow your mind out of the water. And I want to be able to get through this to recruits, to say, hey,
sure,
you come work for me, dude, because your eyes will just light up and you will have fun working. And that's why I want people to have fun. I didn't have fun plumbing. To me, it was boring and tedious. I have fun solving problems. And I want to put everybody in a position where they can solve problems easily and quickly and not do the
right,
tedious typing, right? And that's why I
right,
talk about fun, because if you have fun coming to work, then guess what? You're going to work more productively. You're not going to be looking at the clock. Oh my God, when am I going to leave this place? This sucks. You're not going to be doing that. You say, this is great. I love my job. And then everybody wins.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's
Yeah.
true.
that's something for you guys to think about. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Okay, John.
Talk to you
Thank you
later.
very much.
Bye.
Yeah,
Yep.
bye.